Okay, what I might do, I think that there's a PIO in the senior, they're doing some kind of a news conference or something.
Do you happen to have a iPhone charger? If not, I'm going to ask the newsroom to like bring us one because I just ran out of here. I have like 50% battery.
We could break it.
You do in the car?
Yeah.
Where's your car? Over there? Oh, so not. So can I get it? Do you mind? Or do you want to get it since it's your car and you know where it is? And I'll guard the camera. Tell me where. Center console. It's like the battery pack and because I don't need just like the wire. I need like a yeah exactly. Okay, here you go. I'm gonna ask them to bring us one.
I don't think it's gonna hit just because I gotta go that far. I wonder if you okay, well let's do that. I think we got a video. How do we go to this press conference?
Alright, there's a press conference now.
Bring down Secretary of the Press.
Barricade here. We have to drop that. Roll back to what we were before.
As much as I can. I only got one, so I'm getting it. Tell me when. We got there. We're there. We're there. This is one of the most famous people now.
What's that? Yeah. Okay, they may put us back up for web. Like me talking on web. Should I dial back into IFB or just talk? Question mark. Talk to text is terrible, period. Should I dial into IFB and wait for an anchor to talk to me, question mark, or should I just talk, question mark? Ooh. Suspect dead for one source.
Check, 1, 2, 3. Yep, I can hear you.
More or lobbying going on. Most of that's done in the office buildings. Typically speaking, the people entering in that entryway are going to be journalists, and they need specific badges. You'll also get National Guard members who sometimes actually are going to and from the Union Station food mart. They've got the food court out there, so that's most of the pedestrian traffic out there. It'll be interesting to see whether or not this car somehow picked up speed along Delaware Avenue, or whether or not they turned from Constitution onto Delaware, because it's a very tight turn in that direction. So it'll be interesting to see what police say about that, because if it approached at a high speed from some way out, keep in mind Delaware itself also has vehicle barriers, but I believe as of lately those have been deployed down as just to allow vehicle traffic to go through, especially since the collapse of the security barrier from a much wider security barrier into something that's just surrounding the Capitol grounds itself. Keep in mind, Constitution Avenue hasn't been open for much since the January 6th attack. So still a lot more that we're looking at, but again, U.S. Capitol Police Chief Yogananda Pittman has to be certain that she is protecting all entryways into the Capitol at this point, and it appears as if D.C. Metropolitan Police is helping out with that right now.
And we imagine that that's something that they've been dealing with in this post-mortem after the insurrection, dealing with some of those security failures that allowed the insurrectionists to make their way into the Capitol, certainly trying to figure out where the weak points in the Capitol are right now. I know you talked with plenty of security experts and the weeks after the insurrection that were specifically identifying where improvements can be made in the security issues surrounding the Capitol.
Right. You have to harden the target, according to what security experts say. Now, the Capitol itself, the building itself, as we saw on January 6th, is actually a very soft target. The windows can be kicked in. They don't even really have any laminate to protect themselves like a car window would. So the building itself is very porous, and that is something that U.S. Capitol Police are going to have to look at with the architect of the Capitol. These vehicle barriers, though, are less so, because you still have the fencing around and you also have these metal barriers. So if this was an intentional attack, it was foolish, because in a sense, not only do you have the heightened awareness of the U.S. Capitol Police, but you also have the National Guard. If this was some sort of deliberate attack, I have no idea what their plan was on this one.
Yeah, of course, investigators are trying to figure that out right now. Nathan Baca, thank you so much. Mike Valerio is on the ground right now. Mike, you've been talking to your sources that have been giving us a lot more color and context about this investigation. What are you finding out for us?
Well, Larry, we're able to report now based on 2 law enforcement sources directly familiar with the matter. The suspect here is dead, shot by Capitol Police, and it was found that the suspect did have a knife in their car when it careened into the barrier on the Senate side here of the U.S. Capitol. What is unclear right now is the condition or conditions of the 2 U.S. Capitol Police officers who were hit. They were in critical. The last time we got an update from our sources about 20 minutes ago, they believe that we know the hospital that they're being treated in right now. So again, to repeat, the suspect in this ramming attack is dead. We are hoping to get an update on the conditions of the 2 officers who were badly injured, rammed by this dark-colored sedan that had its front crushed by the barrier when it ran into that Senate line of blockades up, of course, for security reasons. So as our photojournalist Kyle Watkins pushes in to the scene that we're able to look at right now, a block up the hill, let's take you back through what exactly we know. This all started just before 1:15 this afternoon when initial dispatches came through of a shooting at Capitol Hill. That turned out to be the contingent of Capitol Police officers who opened fire when somebody, we don't know where exactly this person is from at the moment, charged their car into the Senate side barrier and into those 2 Capitol Police officers. What we saw, Larry, and I'm trying to gauge just how unprecedented this was, but a U.S. Park Police helicopter landing on the plaza of the east front of the Capitol to assist the security perimeter and perhaps to make sure that these 2 officers got to the local hospital as quickly as possible. But just, there is a new security rapid force that has been formed since the January 6th attack. We're told by one source with whom we're deeply connected at the Pentagon that strike team was indeed implemented. But it's such a striking scene to see that Park Police helicopter land on the east front of the Capitol. So after the wounded were taken out of the immediate scene where that car had crashed into the Senate barrier, law enforcement then, from what we're told, moved into the next step of making sure that there were no explosives, no other threat inside the car. We're told, and our colleagues at CBS News are also told, nothing was found inside that car. It was clear of explosives, but a knife was found in the suspect's possession. And again, the suspect dead from gunshot wounds sustained here at the U.S. Capitol when that contingent of officers opened fire as soon as this scene escalated into our worst fears in the wake of the January 6th attack. It's just unimaginable, Larry, as the security posture has been diminishing in recent weeks, to think what kind of fencing we're now going to see, what kind of heightened law enforcement presence we're going to see, as well as U.S. Capitol Police have signaled over the past few weeks and months that they are not adequately prepared to handle this new threat that the Capitol faces in this era after the Trump presidency. Larry, let's send it back to you as we check our notes and check back in with our contacts.
Yeah, certainly a lot of good insight there. Michael, thank you so much. We certainly got a lot, especially regarding knowing now, according to sources that Mike Valerio was able to speak to, that the suspect in this incident is now dead. Lorenzo Hall joining us in the studio right now. Lorenzo, it has been no doubt a tense afternoon.
Yeah, it has been, Larry. And what I find unfortunate about what we're watching right now is, a lot of people in D.C. were sort of breathing a sigh of relief when they started removing some of the fencing, some of the barriers around the U.S. Capitol. I was actually driving along this street this time yesterday, and I thought, this is refreshing, okay? Yeah. You didn't see as many of the National Guard troops standing watch like we were in this sort of military state. But then you have something like this, and obviously that's going to change their posture over the next couple of weeks or so as we look live here along Constitution Avenue. For those of you at home not really familiar with the directions here, this is the side of the Capitol going toward Union Station, facing that part of the city. So we saw some of those barriers coming down, but this is where we are right now, so I'm sure that's going to change once again in the weeks and months ahead. And another thing I want to point out, I don't know if we have a shot of that car. Again, our colleagues at CBS News pointed this out as well, Larry. You saw the airbags deployed in that car. So clearly this suspect really rammed into that barrier pretty hard for the airbags to be deployed in that sense. And they also got through that fencing, that initial barrier.
Yeah, and you know, speaking of the fencing, even as it was coming down a few weeks ago, Capitol Police were clear that should we encounter a threat, we will answer swiftly and aggressively. And to not mistake the fact that the fencing was coming down as a sign of weakness on the part of Capitol Police, as well as the National Guard, that's been stationed there for weeks now after the insurrection at the Capitol.
And clearly what was in place before the fencing worked. That stop barrier has been there for quite some time. It clearly stopped the car. So, you know, you can't argue that, hey, we need more fencing, we need more barriers to stop this, because the original barrier that's in place did its job.
As well as the law enforcement that was also on the ground as well. Let's bring in Kobe Satterfield. She is on the grounds of the U.S. Capitol. Kobe, what are you seeing? What can you tell us?
Hey Larry, I am by the Senate fountain on the Senate side of the building where all of this unfolded. I'm going to get out of the way so we can actually zoom in and give you a perspective we haven't been able to see before. You can see several ambulances here. Again, this is the Senate side of the building along Constitution Avenue, which is where authorities are saying the suspect rammed their car and where those two officers were critically injured. Again, we know that all three have been taken to the local hospital. You can see here, no one is able to get past this point. We've seen Mike Valerio's vantage point at the bottom of the hill here. We're now on the top of the hill at the side. Several ambulances. You can see several, a big law enforcement presence. For people, I was here a few days ago walking around, and it is striking how much more, the bolstering up of the law enforcement here. There's police here that, have bomb sniffing dogs. Now bolstering back up. Again, this is the Senate side of the building where we're told this all went down, where the car rammed through the security checkpoint. Again, that suspect is in custody. All three have been taken to the hospital, including those two officers who have been critically injured. Now we are here at the Senate fountain area. This is where we are told that we will hear from a Capitol Police spokesperson to hopefully get a little bit more information about what all went down here. Unfolds here. Larry.
Kobe, thank you so much. A point of clarification, according to Mike Valerio, again, he tells us that the suspect is now dead. The condition of the two U.S. Capitol Police officers at this point, at last check, was critical. We have yet to get an update, but we know that the situation is serious and that they are getting treated right now. The Capitol Police officers that were injured are getting treated at the hospital. Let's bring in Zach Merchant, who's also at the Capitol for us. Zach, we're still waiting for this news conference to take place. At that time, we expect to get a lot more information about what exactly took place, a better sense of the timeline, and potentially whether or not they believe that there's any type of evidence that could lead to a motive, give them potential insight about what would provoke someone to ram their vehicle into an access checkpoint, injuring two U.S. Capitol Police officers.
Yeah, Larry, you're absolutely right. Certainly a lot of questions still that remain to be answered. One of them, Mike Valerio is reporting, just seems to have answered, but still lots more. We're waiting on that press conference. One thing that we do know for sure, we're on the west side here. We're by Constitution and First. And as we've talked about throughout the afternoon here, the seriousness of the response today and the tension that we can see in some of the law enforcement officers and the National Guards and the National Guards women. Take a look here. They are ringing the Capitol here, and the seriousness and the tension that you could feel from them was similar to what we saw on the 6th. I've been out here for 30, maybe 45 minutes around the Capitol complex. Got here originally over near where Colby was, close to that fountain. When we got there, there was 2 guards people, 1 police officer at that intersection there near C and Delaware. And the Capitol Police officer, you could tell she was working her phone, she was working her radio, trying to do a lot of what we seem to be doing. She was kind of on the further edges of the coverage there and was trying to answer some questions implications for herself. Obviously, the response gotten much heavier on the further perimeter out here as we get further away from the Capitol. You can see guardsmen and women, they have shields out, they have riot gear on, you can see the shin pads, the helmets, and this rings a good part of the Capitol complex. Authorities asking people to stay away from this area if you can. If you are press and you are going to be in the area, they're asking us to show our badges, but if you are at home, you're waiting for answers just like so many of us are, the best is to stay at home, stay out of this area, wait for that press conference, Larry.
Yeah, that press conference, we're just getting told from U.S. Capitol Police, is going to take place at 2:45. Zach Merchant, thank you so much. Mike Valerio, we understand that you have new information for us. Mike?
That right now it seems as though the suspect here, who again is dead, is a U.S. national. So that is what we're being told by law enforcement officials who are directly knowledgeable of the situation. More detail as to what happened behind us at the crime scene just before 1:15. It appears as though, again, based on sources who have reviewed what exactly happened through people who were there, through their Capitol Police colleagues, they were able to tell us that the suspect in this case rammed into the Senate barrier and then exited their car and brandished the knife. So earlier we weren't sure if the knife was found in the car or if the suspect had the knife, but now it appears, based on this new information that we're hearing, the suspect rams into those two Capitol Police officers and the Senate barricade, gets out of their car with the knife, and then is shot by Capitol Police officers who are at the Senate North checkpoint. Of course, we have learned that those gunshots proved to be fatal. We are hoping to learn at this news conference in 20 minutes time the conditions, the updated conditions of these two Capitol Police officers. But that's the latest that we have from here. The scene is starting to quiet down, and law enforcement officials who we're speaking with, apologize as I fix my mask right here, they seem to be on the, it's difficult to describe, on the calmer side, Larry, than they were about a half hour ago when we still weren't sure what was exactly in this car. Their mood seems to have calmed significantly, but what is hanging over the situation now, of course, are the conditions of the two officers and what will happen now in the immediate aftermath of this incident to our Capitol security. Larry.
Mike, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Great reporting out there. Lorenzo, I want to bring you into this because, you know, this really does speak to this constant threat that they're dealing with now in the post-mortem of the insurrection at the Capitol in January. These security threats that not only put other people at harm, but also increase the threat level for everyone surrounding the area that live close by, that work close by. This is something that I can imagine that they're going to be wrestling with, especially when it comes to the fencing, right? We saw this first layer of fencing coming down just a few weeks ago. I'd imagine that once they get back from recess, that they'll have to have a conversation again about whether or not the fencing that we saw needs to go back up and whether or not it needs to be permanent.
Yeah, and you know, we're looking at this incident here, the investigation that's underway there at that scene, but you better bet, because of the location we're talking about here, how this happened, they also want to make sure it's not part of some larger plot.
Right.
Whether it be in you know, international or something domestically. So all of the agencies, intelligence agencies, are involved in this just to make sure, like, this is it. And I can't help, Larry, but to think back to that 2013 incident, the woman who she ran the barriers at the White House, drove up Pennsylvania Avenue, up Constitution Avenue, not too far from this scene here, a woman from Connecticut. And it sort of played out in the very same way. So to some degree, U.S. Capitol Police officers and these other police agencies in D.C., federal agencies, are familiar with this sort of act, and they prepare for this sort of incident. But again, you want to make sure this particular incident is not part of something much larger.
Something that they're absolutely will be looking into. Yeah. Let's go back to Nathan Baca right now. Nathan, the details in the situation have certainly been developing. We're getting a lot more context about the situation itself. Reporting from Mike Valerio, giving us a better timeline of how the events unfolded with the suspect, male or female, we don't know, ramming their car into that barricade, also injuring two U.S. Capitol Police officers, getting out of that vehicle, brandishing a knife, according to Mike, and then getting shot by officers and guards on the scene.
That's right, because right now, U.S. Capitol Police under Chief Yogananda Pittman have to really find out exactly whether or not going into January 6th, where pipe bombs were being laid south of the Capitol grounds to try to divert police attention during the Capitol insurrection. There is no indication that that is the case right now. And also, just by reporting by Mike Valerio, it does appear as if the threat level seems to be going down. The officers have control over the ground. They don't appear to be in as heightened of a threat step right now. You also have the possibilities of trying to figure out exactly what the intent of the driver of that car was. Was it suicide by cop? Was it some sort of situation similar to what happened in 2013, as Lorenzo was saying, in the case of Miriam Carey in October 2013, where you had a situation where a woman supposedly was having some sort of physical or mental situation at the time. All that right now is being investigated by U.S. Capitol Police in conjunction with a lot of other officers. But it was very interesting to see very early on just how Metropolitan Police was also rushing resources in that area to effectively protect the flank. You have Capitol Police having to pay attention to its northern flank because of what happened and the investigators going there. But you also have to make sure that all the other approaches are protected. Keep in mind, the House and the Senate are not in session right now. So that's good news in a sense, because it creates fewer people that the U.S. Capitol Police has to protect. You don't have the dignitary protection situation going on where, like what you have with January 6th, where you have a bunch of different, you had different targets that were in place, from the Secret Service protecting the vice president. You don't have that situation happening right now, which is good. It enables the police to focus purely on what is happening here, what happened, investigate what happened, but also still pay attention to the other part of the perimeter, a much smaller perimeter now in the past few weeks, now that the outer perimeter that stretched all the way to Union Station is now collapsed to that inner perimeter. Keep in mind that entryway, I've gone through that entryway multiple times since January 6th. Typically speaking, you have just the National Guard, usually on the east side of that stop barrier, and they're just kind of staying in place, usually about 5 or 6 of them we'd see at a time. There's usually about 2 Capitol Police officers that are either in front of that metal barrier, or usually one in front and then one behind. It will be interesting to find out later on whether or not those Capitol Police officers even had time to challenge that car. So a lot of things we're still going to be finding out from our crews in the field, and we'll be looking to analyze them here.
Yeah, so much
to
to uncover in all of this, but it will prove to be even more difficult now that the suspect in this case is dead. Nathan Baca, thank you so much. Let's bring in Zach Merchant, who is live along the Capitol Force. Zach, what can you tell us?
Yeah, hey Larry. Again, I just want to take a look at the response out here. So many National Guardsmen and women. We're on Constitution and First on the west side of the Capitol here, and hearing reporting from Mike and from Nathan there. One of the stark differences from January 6th is just how quickly this area, this fairly wide perimeter, has been locked down around the Capitol. Within roughly an hour or so of all of this news breaking, it is a very tight perimeter from our vantage point here on the west side of the Capitol. You can see again, guardsmen and women, they've got their shields out, they've got the knee pads, the shin pads, the helmets are on, and they are, if we can zoom in here, Dave, behind the lens here, but they stretch all the way around the Capitol perimeter. It took several hours. If we remember back to what happened on January 6th, it took several hours to get this kind of control of the Capitol complex. Like Mike and like Nathan were talking about, there likely will be more conversations about the fencing that was up in a wider perimeter around the Capitol complex and has been receding, but one thing that is clear is, compared to January 6th, this response, at least on our side, at least from what we can see here, National Guardsmen and law enforcement have locked down this complex much, much quicker than on the 6th.
I guess we can call that lessons learned, no doubt. Zach Merchant, thank you so much. A lot to take in here, Lorenzo, as we've been watching from our reporters on the ground there. And this map here giving us a bit more context about where that incident took place.
Yeah, so what we're looking at here, the Capitol complex is extremely large. You all know that. And you can see the crash at the barricade. Delaware Avenue going up toward the Capitol there, that red dot. That street's closed off, so it's not like this driver, this suspect here, could have, picked up speed significantly because that street is closed off. So you really only have Constitution Avenue right there to turn onto, to turn in toward the Capitol complex. And I wonder, and Nathan touched on this, you don't have a lot of the Hill staffers there, lawmakers aren't in session.
Right.
I wonder if they were more suspect or suspicious of this driver turning in just because you didn't have as much traffic.
So it stands out.
Right. So that entrance is really only for high-level staffers.
Makes sense.
Visitors wouldn't turn into this entrance. It's usually where you see the black cars going in whenever they're in session. So I'm sure when they saw, just this regular civilian car pulling in, they were already sort of suspicious, and that may have given them some heads up. But again, Constitution Avenue just opened up not too long ago. So to have an incident like this is I'm sure going to be pretty concerning for them. But look at those stop barriers. You can see right there on the right side of your screen. There's no way a person can miss that
at all.
And there's no way you're getting through those either. They retract when needed, but they've been up ever since January 6th. So,
and you have to ask the question about whether or not isolated incidents like this that are smaller still pose a security threat for them, right? I mean, granted, it is not the large scale incident that we saw in January, but even issues and incidents like this are troubling because
it adds to it. It adds to the narrative.
It adds to the narrative, and it results in injuries, as we see now with those 2 U.S. Capitol police officers. Again, the suspect is dead. Those 2 officers that were injured at that access point remain in the hospital. At last check, their condition was critical. Let's go to Mike Valerio right now, who has been reporting on this incident for some time. Mike, what can you tell us?
Well, Larry, we have 2 sources in Congress who are gravely concerned about the condition of one officer, less so concerned about the condition of the second officer here. So we're waiting for more clarity on that. But again, this is from, so just check my notes here in the latest that we're getting. 2 sources within the Congress who have grave concerns about whether one officer who was struck is going to make it, and they say that the other officer who was injured in critical condition is doing better right now. So that certainly adds a layer of anxiety, an added element of seriousness to the situation that we're still processing right now. And as we continue to just check in on the scene as we have it here, we're again waiting for that news conference that is scheduled to start within the next 10 minutes or so. But as you've stayed with us through the better part of the past close to an hour or over an hour right now, the scene is quieting down. The processing for evidence has begun, and now that we know that the car is clear of all weapons and that it has been marked safe. The suspect dead, though, after ramming into the officers and the Senate North barricade, coming out of their car, brandishing the knife, and we're again trying to gauge whether this was a medium-sized knife or a larger machete, and then being shot, and those gunshot wounds proved to be fatal at a local hospital just under the better part of a half hour later. We're also working on, Larry, to try and figure out right now who this person was. We don't have too much clarity on that, other than it appears from law enforcement that we are talking about a U.S. national here rather than an international suspect. Again, the changing contours of law enforcement now that we have more people who have been radicalized and are targeting the Capitol for these types of actions. And as we've noted throughout our broadcast right here, up until 2.5 weeks ago, this stretch of Constitution Avenue was off limits. It was sealed off by fencing, and it was seen as a victory by pretty much every member of the Congress that these barriers were starting to come down. And now the future situation, given what we all have just witnessed and are continuing to process, seems so unclear at this hour.
Hey, Mike, it's Lorenzo. Do you know where the officers were stationed? Were they right next to the fencing before getting a little deeper into the Capitol complex near that stop barrier, or were they at that station, the second station?
I'm under the impression they were. I mean, you've been there, I've been there. It's like a kiosk right by that barrier that goes up from the street. I don't have more granular information as to where exactly they were standing, but they were at that North Senate checkpoint. So I can work on that. Sorry, I don't have a little more detail about that. I'm hoping that we hear from Yogananda Pittman, the interim chief of Capitol Police, at this news conference, and she answers that, Lorenzo.
Mike Valerio, thank you so much. You know,
and I want to point out, there you go, you have it right there. You see those barriers retracting?
Right.
Those were down just hours before. Earlier this morning, you would have been able to just drive up and down the street. But again, when you have a threat, these barriers go up in place like you see happening right there. But I should point out, the barriers near the Capitol where the suspect crashed, those stay up at all times. So those only go down, obviously, when high-level staffers are going in and out of the complex.
Well, there's already speculation, at least growing online, that had that additional fencing been up, the one that was taken down a few weeks ago, had it been up at this time, that potentially it could have derailed this from taking place. Of course, that's speculative at this point, but we will see what the investigation, where the facts lead us.
But then you crash into another fence.
Right. Our coverage continues with our partners at CBS News. Stand by.
Washington, there was a press conference related to this at the Capitol. Let's listen in as Capitol Police give an update on the situation there.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Acting Chief Yogananda Pittman for the United States Capitol Police. It is with a heavy heart that I come here this afternoon to shed some light time. The suspect has been pronounced deceased. 2 U.S. Capitol Police officers our U.S. Capitol Police family in your thoughts and prayers. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to the Metropolitan Police Chief, Mr. Robert Conti, for the Metropolitan Police Department's portion of this investigation. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm Robert Conti, Acting Chief of the Metropolitan Police Department. Our members responded to the U.S. Capitol today just after 1 o'clock p.m. To investigate an officer-involved shooting. At this time, the Metropolitan Police Department's Homicide Division, as well as our Internal Affairs Division, will now take over the investigation with respect to the shooting death that occurred, as well as the officer's death. There's not a lot of information that we can release to the public at this time. But we certainly will be working very closely with our partners at the Park Police, at the U.S. Capitol Police. At this time, I just want to extend my deepest condolences on behalf of the entire Metropolitan Police Department to all of the officers at the United States Capitol Police for their service and unfortunately for the loss of life that have occurred here today at the United States Capitol Police.
Chief, is there an ongoing threat here on Capitol Hill or in the neighborhood? What can you tell residents that live here as well as folks that work in this area?
At this time, it does not appear to be an ongoing threat. Obviously, we're in the very early stages of our investigation, We need to obviously understand the motivation behind this senseless act. So the Metropolitan Police Department will certainly be doing that.
I know you said the suspect was Chester. Any reason to know that he was known to Capitol Police or MPD beforehand? Any indication that he was somebody that had been around the Capitol before, maybe spotted, anything like that?
It does not appear that he is known to the Capitol Police or the Metropolitan Police Department at this time.
Is this a terrorism-related?
Sir?
Is this a terrorism-related incident?
It does not appear to be terrorism related, but obviously we'll continue to investigate to see if there's some type of nexus along those lines.
Will the National Guard's posture change at all? What's their mission look like the next couple of days?
I'll refer that to the United States Capitol Police.
I would say that at this time the investigation is still in its preliminary stages, so we don't have that information. And the Capitol Police, as far as its security posture, remains in a steady state at this time. We are very thankful for our National Guard partnership. We do have National Guard on the campus, but the security posture at this time remains the same.
Chief, you said that obviously the motive, you're still looking at the motive, I understand that. Any reason to believe that there was any specific target of member of Congress? Was there a specific member of Congress that the suspect may have been trying to go after? Any indication of who that may have been, if that was the case?
We do not have the suspect on file with U.S. Capitol Police, so there's no indication at this time that there's any nexus to any member of Congress.
You speak also to the
Yes, ma'am.
Drugs or alcohol involved? Do you believe you found any of that in the car?
We cannot confirm that, but the investigation is ongoing. The suspect did exit the vehicle with a knife in hand, and at that time he started to lunge toward, run aggressively toward U.S. Capitol Police office. No, that part of the investigation is still ongoing. The scene is still being processed by Metropolitan Police Department, so we will have additional information at a later time.
Did the suspect ever come in contact? I know you mentioned the lunge, but did the suspect come in contact and wrestle with the police officer there?
The investigation is ongoing. From what we can see from video at this time, I do not see the suspect wrestling with a U.S. Capitol Police officer, but when he exited the vehicle, the knife was clearly in his hand, and he did start to run toward the officers. So at this time, this is all the questions that I am going to take. I turn it back over to Metropolitan Police Department's chief. Again, I ask you to please keep the United States Capitol Police family in your thoughts and prayers at this time. It has been an extremely difficult and challenging year for us, but we will get through this, and we do appreciate the community's support. Thank you.
Hey folks, we understand that you guys have a lot of questions. Obviously this is a complex investigation. We are going to be putting out more information as we can on social media, and if we decide to do any more briefings later on, we'll of course let you guys know right away. Thank you.
One question I have, looking at the grand fabric of all of this, USCP has changed their intelligence, the way they're sharing it. They've been doing what they can to try to beef up the security here, and still they're under attack. What's the answer?
Yeah, well, I think, just part of our responsibilities and duties as law enforcement officers, we're here to protect and serve community. Clearly, this was someone who was actively trying to just get at whoever or whatever. We just don't know right now. So we have a responsibility to investigate that, to get to the bottom of this, whether the attack was at law enforcement or whoever. We have a responsibility to get to the bottom of it, and we'll do that. Thank you.
At the scene or at the hospital? Brian, Whitney. Whoever. Brian, I'm over here. I got both your questions.